Kia ora tātou, ko Michael Fielding, Takawenga. I'm the Chief Executive of AUT Ventures. So AUT, is this a bit too loud? That's great, okay. Probably a bit of speaker right, there it is. AUT Ventures is an integral part of AUT. We're a wholly owned subsidiary of AUT, but we inherit the charitable purpose of AUT, which is about research, education, and creating impact from the skills of our researchers and our students in the future. Today is not about AUT Ventures, but we are in the business of creating impact in certain areas from AUT research, generally through commercialisation and where staff are consulting out to industry. So we have a real interest in making AUT research really applicable to the real world. And we have today a wonderful panel and facilitated by Professor Nikki, who is the Director of Person-Centred Research in the Faculty of Health and Environmental Science. And I'm going to get out of the way very quickly. Thank you very much for chime. That might be the get off the stage chime, because this really is about research and about the contribution that AUT people can make to the future. Thank you, Nicola.
Morena koutou, ko Whatu, no ingarangi o ku tupuna, ko Jobson toki whānau no tairawhiti aho, kei tamaki makoto, toki kāinga inaine, ko Nicola Kaye's taku ingoa. Welcome to this panel discussion. I think one of the key hats I'm wearing today, and that is one of the reasons I'm really interested in facilitating this panel, is that I hold the hat of Associate Dean of Research in our Faculty of Health and Environmental Sciences, and one of my roles is to really look for opportunities where we can grow our research contribution, and I'm particularly interested in how we do that to contribute to impacting in ways that can benefit society and the world. And so I'm really excited to have this opportunity to talk with this really diverse group of external guests who I'm hoping will put some challenges on the table for us through the course of the discussion this morning. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce each of our panel members, and as I introduce each of you, I'm just going to invite you to say a little bit more about the industries that you're working in or with, and maybe if you can just share one or two initial reflections about the emerging trends that are top of mind for you when you think about your everyday work, what sits in the back of mind as you go to sleep at night or while you're having the shower. That's where I do my thinking, just as I'm about to fall asleep or in the shower. So I'm going to start with you, Kathryn. So Kate is an engineer by training, inspired to pursue a technology-based career by a primary school teacher who encouraged her interest in science. She believes in creating pathways for underrepresented groups to explore careers in scientific fields early on, which can lead to developing world-changing technologies. Currently as Program Manager at Bridgewest Ventures, Kaye oversees day-to-day operations and aims to foster a deep tech ecosystem in New Zealand. Her 17-year career in the Royal New Zealand Air Force included managing aircraft maintenance and leading engineering teams, notably in developing an airborne surveillance system. She also holds a Master's in Aerospace Vehicle Design. Kate transitioned to New Zealand's incubator ecosystem in 2019, driven by her passion for deep tech's potential to provide sustainable industry alternatives to traditional exports and improve New Zealand's future. Awesome. So Kathryn, maybe if you could just tell us just a little bit more about the industries you're working in and with now, and I guess any of the stuff that's sitting top of mind for you at the moment.
Thanks, Nicola. Yes, so I've reinvented myself into venture capital, and it's such a fun space where I get the privilege of meeting a lot of amazing scientists and engineers who really want to solve global problems. So we're a deep tech incubator, which means that we will go around all the universities and research institutes across the country and look for research that could possibly solve those global problems, and then support those into commercial ventures alongside the likes of AUT Ventures. We work closely with all tech transfer offices across the globe. And so in terms of trends, I mean, at the moment it's been a really challenging time to raise money for these really early stage ventures. So we're a lot of our companies that are graduating are really having to do about a year of fundraising to find, you know, the next $10 million to scale their technology globally, and we've invested in everything from, you know, therapeutics, med devices, agricultural tech, AI type things, and pharmaceutical manufacturing so it's been a really interesting time, but now is the time for innovation and very early stage innovation, because we'll very soon emerge where we get back into the market where people are willing to take risks to solve the big problems and reap the rewards.
Nice. So next up, Murray Bruges. Murray is Executive Director of the Helen Clark Foundation, and prior to the foundation, Murray worked for Fonterra Cooperative Group in Auckland on resource management and environmental policy. From 2011 to 2020, Murray worked for the New Zealand Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade in a range of roles focused on trade, economic tech and climate policy, including a 3-year posting in the New Zealand Consulate General in Los Angeles. Earlier in his career, Murray worked for the Ministry of Fisheries on a range of policy issues, now living in Auckland with his wife and son. Murray.
Thank you. Well, tēnā koutou katoa, nā mihi nui kia koutou katoa. I'm the director of the Helen Clark Foundation, which is an independent, non-partisan, evidence-based public policy think tank. That is quite an adjective string. We might get into what some of them mean throughout the course of the discussion. Thinking about, I guess, the trends, what I think about when I'm falling asleep, what this foundation is focused on. I think it comes back to a sense of, we're lucky to live in Aotearoa, New Zealand, arguably, amongst the best governed countries in the world. But we're the early part of the 21st century is proven to be a pretty challenging time for democracies all around the world, and you can see some pretty big issues coming down the pike at us. And New Zealand has a lot of strengths, but we're not necessarily good at dealing with some of our central long-term challenges, which have plagued us for a long time, and some of which are getting worse rather than better. So we do a lot of thinking about how can New Zealand realistically grapple with some of the challenges it faces. We don't have a particularly productive economy. We have an aging population. We've got long-term structural inequality, and like everybody else, we're facing massive risks from climate change. What would it look like to actually seriously engage with those problems as a country and prepare ourselves for what aren't going to be some easy decades ahead?
Cool. So next up, we've got Robyn Whittaker. Robyn is a public health physician and professor at the National Institute for Health Innovation at the University of Auckland. She is also currently Director of Evidence Research and Clinical Trials with Te Whatu Ora, Health New Zealand, which sits in the Service Improvement and Innovation Directorate. She's Chair of the National AI Expert Advisory Group in Te Whatu Ora and a member of several international and World Health Organization groups on digital health and AI. Robyn, tell us a little bit more.
Kia ora koutou, and ngā mihi nui Nikki and AUT for inviting me here. It's a great pleasure to be part of this really interesting panel. So in terms of the context for the health service really for New Zealand, in case anyone has not been watching the news for about the past month, you will know that we're in a bit of an environment of cost containment right now, of really trying to control the costs of how we provide health services across Aotearoa, as well as nationalising what we do, standardising what we do. So in that kind of austere environment and context, I think it's really important that we innovate. And you will have heard Lester Levy, who you will all know from AUT, talk about the importance of innovating in this environment to try and do things better with less. So that's kind of the context that we live in. It's difficult times within the health service right now, difficult for all those who are working in it. But in terms of the key trends, that we've been seeing and that we're really interested in. I think I've got two kind of big meta trends, I guess. One is around anything that helps us to take things that have previously been or currently done in hospitals into the home. And there's a lot in the medical technologies devices space. There's things around miniaturization of devices, things getting cheaper, things getting more applicable for consumers to use rather than experts and clinicians to use. Point of care testing, remote monitoring. There's a load in that medical devices and technology spaces that should really help us to move things that have been really resource intensive and really expensive into being much more proactive, much more about wellness and keeping people well, keeping people out of hospital. So that's kind of one big mega trend. But one other trend that's probably a little bit more closer to home is around AI. As you've heard, it's an interest of mine, but the promise of AI to help us in the health system is huge. We're not there yet. There's no obvious silver bullets that we can just put in at the moment. They do require us to have really good digital systems in the first place in order to do AI on top of it. So we've got a lot of work to do, but I think the promise of AI and generative AI is a really big trend in health at the moment, and I'm sure we'll see a lot more of that in the future.
Cool.
Thanks.
Thanks, Robyn. Next up is Erena Calder Hawkins. Erena is Research Engagement Lead at Sprout Agritech, New Zealand's leading agritech and food tech accelerator and early stage investor. Erena is deeply passionate about all things science and startups, as well as the agri-food sector and supporting Indigenous and female innovators. Erena holds a Bachelor of Science in Biochemistry and a Masters of Bioscience Enterprise from the University of Auckland. And Erena recently returned to New Zealand from a European agri-food immersion tour. Sounds fascinating, and a work secondment at a US-based ag biotech startup.
Yeah.
Erena.
Thank you. Probably recently to go to Europe and America to experience their agri-food ecosystem. Additionally, got to try some amazing food as being within the food sector, so that was great. But like Bridgewest, Sprout Agritech, we're part of the incubator scheme that Callahan runs. So as you said, we're an early stage investor and accelerator supporting agritech and food tech ventures. Two trends that are top of my mind, or Sprout Agritech's mind, and I love numbers, so I'm going to give you some numbers, is that I suppose a concerning trend is that we're seeing a decrease in agri-food tech investment globally, so actually down 50% to about 15.6 billion. And additionally, we're actually seeing agri-food tech investment in the VC landscape as well decreasing to about 5.5%. And there are many reasons for that. Overall, we're seeing VC investment dropping, and because of valuations, because of within the agri-food sector, we're not seeing as many exits. But one thing that is very interesting is actually per category, we're seeing an increase in bioenergy and biomaterials within the agri-food tech sector. In particular, a deal that I was following recently was Footprint, which is a biocomposite material made from natural fibres from America, a $280 million Series A, which is huge for material. So I think if I was to pose something to the audience today is that how can New Zealand be in that space? How can we be around in materials and energy?
Fab, thanks. And last but not least, the Honourable Nikki Kaye, who has the best name on the panel today. The Honourable Nikki Kaye is former Member of Parliament for Auckland Central, where she served for 4 terms. She held several ministerial roles in the national government, including Minister of ACC, Civil Defence, Youth, Food Safety and Education, diverse portfolios, and was the Deputy Leader of the New Zealand National Party. Currently, Nikki is Director of AUT Ventures, an independent consultant focused on education technology, as hopefully you all know, and an external advisor for Bain & Company. She is also involved in renewable energy through her advisory role at Aotea Energy. Additionally, Nikki co-founded the Blue Nature Aotearoa Trust, is a patron of the Beginners Institute and a member of the Asia Pacific Leadership Network. Fab.
Tēnā koutou katoa. Well, firstly, thank you very much for being here today. acknowledge Michael from AUT Ventures and all of you. I think one of the privileges of coming out of politics and then like segueing into a completely new field is the humbling experiences that I've had to meet many researchers, people in the field of technology, but then also have this period to end up coming back to two things that I've always cared about in my life. And those two things are what, and I'll talk a little bit about some of the initiatives that I'm involved in and the trends, have always been the environment and education. And if I was going to sum up two big problems, and we're going to end up talking about the stuff on the panel, in the world, save the planet, and then the human condition, whether that's health and a whole lot of different things. And so the place that I am involved in, whether it's ventures, as an EdTech consultant that advises some governments across the world and looks at what is happening in the EdTech sector, and then involved in kind of two other startups in the enviro tech space. Those two problems are what drive me, and those two problems are what I'm involved in terms of the sector. I'll talk about two things. In terms of education technology, I always say in the area of education, particularly when it comes to the compulsory sector, and whether I was Minister of Education or a consultant now, the challenge is people don't realise, most educators have to be futurists because you are trying to design a system for a world that's going to exist in 20, 30, 40, 50 years. Not that dissimilar to some researchers who take a very long-term view. Problem is you sometimes get politicians that don't take that long-term view. But basically, whether it was bringing a digital fluency curriculum for New Zealand or infrastructure, most of it is never about the technology. It is about what it is that those young people can do to change the world with that technology. So when we talk about, we just talk through a few trends. When we think about gamification and learning, and through Blue Nature Aotearoa, which is, we've got the first pilot with Dr. Nigel Bradley, who's a marine scientist. We've got two schools in this pilot where they're creating social impact programs, building plants and species in water. We think it's really pioneering, but the purpose of a group of the students that are involved in gamification is not to create a game. It is around engagement and motivation, because these are two important facts in terms of driving young people learning. So gamification of learning is one trend. Obviously, artificial intelligence. There's obviously a group of ethical challenges around that. One of the things, I did a speech with the OECD and a group of teachers in Bahrain that I'm very passionate about, is I think it's the 21st century skills that we still need young people to understand. And one of the two things that come to mind when we talk about AI are the centralisation of networks, which many of you will understand, misinformation, the capacity for young people to, not just young people, all citizens, to be able to understand where you're getting your information from, and then be able to realise that if you don't have diverse networks, then your information may not be balanced. A couple of other trends, obviously micro-learning. So, I'll just finish up, but in the area of Blue Nature Aotearoa, for instance, we are working through what could end up being a blue tech apprenticeship scheme, first of its kind, sort of in the world, arguably, but they're learning emerging tech, social impact, project management, and the marine sciences. And how does that look, and how can that be globally scalable, so that we're supporting young people to be an army to help save the planet while they're also learning. And so this issue of micro-learning and what that looks like, how that has quality. So I think that's probably enough from me, but I think whether it's, there's clearly emerging technologies in every field, and I think this capacity for, if New Zealand wants to lead, for more, particularly as well when people are losing their jobs, to be focusing on the upskilling of a whole lot of New Zealanders to understand those technologies while using the amazing, we have incredible IP, and this is just a former role, within government that is never unlocked. And if you combine that emerging tech with what is decades ahead of social policy in some areas, we would be very wealthy and creating more impact to the world. Anyway.
Cool, thank you, excellent. Already oodles of cool ideas on the table for us to talk about. So I'm going to start with some questions around, I guess, some of those emerging trends, the fast-paced change, all of these, real sticky problems or wicked problems, I guess, that we have on the table in front of us. Maybe Erena, if I could start with you. I'm interested in talking a little bit about some of the impacts that sustainability and the impacts on the environment have. And the question in front of me is, how are those things influencing your industry, and what are the challenges they represent? I'd probably add to that, what are the opportunities for innovation? So maybe if you can reflect on that.
If you don't know that if climate change and these environmental challenges aren't impacting agriculture, then I don't know what rock you've been living under. But like I said, I like numbers. I have a few numbers again for you. That by 2050, we're going to expect 10 billion people to be on this world. So that's an additional 2 billion than what we have today, which will require about 50% increase in our food production. And so what we're also seeing today is that farmers, food producers are straining under the pressures of climate change and etc. Some examples top of mind being loss of biodiversity within the farming sector. We're seeing labour shortages, high labour costs as well. No, it's okay. Go behind, here we go. And additionally, I suppose, like all sectors, are seeing supply chain disruptions and complexities, which are making producing food even more complicated. And to that point, your final question being around how does innovation and technology play a role in that? For my Sprout Agritech hat on, huge piece. One being disruptive technologies, which I can go on now or later around. We're seeing an increase in, like I said, bioenergy, but also gene technologies, CEA, so controlled environment, agriculture like vertical farms, digital agriculture, so that's SaaS and AI platforms to help farmers monitor, help farmers traceability with where their food's going. But additionally, from my recent overseas experience, is that technology is one piece, but it's actually farmers, food producers need a suite of solutions, and the other two pieces I would say would be around more education on sustainable farming practices and management, and then on top of that would be policies and regulations that support farmers and food producers to increase productivity, efficiency, and optimise that.
Yeah, great. We had a speaker at our faculty research roadshow yesterday talking to environmental science and ecology, and he talked about, being an introvert as a scientist, but recognising the need to engage with humans even in a non-human research area, if you know what I mean, to kind of really find those win-win solutions that actually you can't just dive forward with these really innovative solutions without engaging, with the farmers and the food producers to kind of understand what the reality is too.
And particularly in VC, we do love those disruptive technologies, and you see a lot of the venture capital money going towards those big fancy technologies, but also at the end of the day, that it is farmers who are making a large proportion of our food. So how can we provide innovation technology to those farmers?
Yeah, nice, cool. And you touched on, I guess, the intersection with education, and so Nikki, I wonder if you can add any further thoughts around the role of sustainability and environment in our future, and what opportunities there are to.
Yeah, sure. And I am probably, because of Blue Nature Aotearoa, which is very, very focused on building plants and species and water, I would say there's a huge opportunity for New Zealand. People don't realise we have one of the largest EEZs in the world. 90% of the world is water. I need to not be too controversial here, but humans have demonstrated that they may be selfish. And so the capacity to be focusing on areas like blue carbon and whether it's re-wetting our wetlands, whether it's my co-founder is heavily involved in regeneration industries such as seaweed, removing kinnibarrens. I think this is a massive opportunity for New Zealand, and the whole area of environmental technology. We're obviously building this small organisation which we hope might become a model for disruption of marine science education to be blue tech. But we have this leadership role that was expected of us when we were gifted such a large area that we need to live up to. And then I think just in the EdTech space, I mean, there's been a lot going on in terms of energy efficiency, smart classrooms, sustainability of devices. But again, I come back to watching these young people in Blue Nature. We've had this group of 20 focused on 11 projects in the marine area. And what is overwhelming is obviously the generation, they all are passionate about saving the planet. Being out and about in nature is hugely important for mental health. But then the other part at the sort of environmental and partner level is this sort of capacity to have secondary, tertiary pathways and young people being ready and out, and the motivation of working with NIWA, motivation of working with Rocket Works. And so I think in the ed tech space, ensuring that more young people in school time are able to be involved in social impact projects. And a big shout out to Claire Amos, who's led the way in terms of Albany Senior High School in this area.
Yeah, great. So moving to, I guess, another one of those big trends, which is AI and tech. So starting with you, Robyn, you're embedded in the digital health and AI world, but how do you see technology and the speed at which that technology is developing impacting, I guess, health in the industry at the moment? What are the game changers? How do we stick with it, move with it?
As I said before, I think it's just going to be so much more important as we go on. So, I think we were kind of keeping ahead of it, keeping in with it when it was fairly straightforward, AI. So, we've used a lot of predictive algorithms. As we've collected more and more digital data over the years, New Zealand's health system has really good national data collections, right? Because we have a unique health identifier. We've had it for one of the longest in the world, and we have linkable data sets to be able to use to do things like predictive algorithms. So some really good work has been going on around things like identifying people at early high risk of chronic disease and intervening earlier than we ever have before, because we actually just have this data now that we can identify those people. We can see who's got all the hallmarks of high risk and who's not on treatment that would actually help to delay the onset of chronic conditions like renal disease. So that kind of work has been going on for a while, and I think has got huge promise. But then the big game changer was, the public release of generative AI models, with ChatGPTs and large language models, really was a big game changer. And I don't think we've quite figured all of that out yet as to what that means. But it's certainly, we had some really good checks and balances and some ethical governance in place around the fairly straightforward AI before that came along, and then that's really changed things, and it's really mean that we've had to go back and really examine how we try and govern the use of those types of AI models that were just suddenly made publicly available. There's lots of risks around that, particularly around privacy and confidentiality of data and the retaining of New Zealand knowledge and mātauranga Māori within New Zealand. These are really kind of new challenges that we're just trying to get to grips with. But again, the promise, the potential of the use of these types of large language models is there. We can definitely see it in providing really personalised and tailored health advice to people, for example. So, being able to provide advice to people in their language and their level of literacy and their context, personal context, is huge. You might have heard of general practitioners using digital scribes all of a sudden. Now, that's something that came out of the blue. No one was predicting that. But these models just save GPs such a huge amount of time that they're voting with their feet and just buying it and using AI that basically is very kind of at the simple end, that's listening to a consultation and then immediately at the end of that consultation is turning that into a structured note for the GP's notes, a structured letter for the patient that they can understand, and then referrals and so forth on, saving huge amounts of time. So we're just trying to figure out how to do these things safely and securely and abiding our privacy rules and ethically within our context. So a lot of work still to be done, but the promise is there.
Yeah, nice. Our dean yesterday was saying that ChatGPT took 2 months to reach 100 million users. So pretty speedy uptake. If only we could get the same level of uptake with everything else that we do, huh? There must be a model there to learn from. Kathryn, I wonder if you want to add to that, just thinking about the role of these developing technologies in the industries that you're working in, how we leverage that, how we manage and mitigate the unintended effects, no,
and I was just riffed a little bit on what you're saying. One of the investments that we did last year was into basically what you were describing, which is training a LLM to support oncologists, so what we call a reference librarian. And so, we're seeing a lot of people doing this in this space, and what we found investable about this group was that the two lead people were both companion diagnostic advisors and had something like 15,000 oncologists across the US and Europe in their network, and had surveyed them and found something like 40% of them were using ChatGPT to quickly, with the patient's histology, how they're presenting, try and find, so what if we provided them with an LLM trained specifically on the references that are, approved by the medical authorities throughout each jurisdiction. But also, even more than that, the oncologists have such a short time with the patient, and then also to upskill on what the new therapeutics, because they're rapidly emerging, these new sort of therapies. What about if it's the ones that have just come to market that are available, that are maybe insured or reimbursed, they call it in the US, or also what trials that they could potentially qualify for and help to marry the patient with the trials that are happening. And I'm sure that the other thing that we're really struggling with at the moment, I guess, is because we're going more into this precision medicine. So we're going away from the chemo, which is great for 60% of patients, depending on the cancer, but just roughly speaking, to other immunology. So where you take the T cells, you modify them and give them back to that patient, and their own T cells do the ninja work on the cancer. And to be able to deliver those treatments requires a whole new hospital design. So at the moment, we're partnering with a foreign investor in Christchurch and partnering with the EDA as well down there to build the hospital that has the layout that we can, it's largely an outpatient treatment where you take the blood and 2 weeks later they come back for their treatment. And they've just started what's called phase 2 of the trials, and phase 1 was insane. Like, we're just the amount of patients that were in remission with such low dosage is really exciting. But now we're looking at how can we then send those patients home, and back to earlier points, we can put sensors on them so that when we start to see a temperature spike, they can be brought back into hospital immediately, and the cytokine response that has the potential to harm them or kill them, we can quickly address that. So it's a really exciting paradigm shift in the way that we can deliver healthcare. So we have a strength in the healthcare area, but there is also looking into the climate tech. The big challenge is, one, our corporates aren't willing to take risks alongside our early stage ventures, and that would be really cool when we unlock, and I look to the research institutes to sort of look to build those partnerships really early with those the corporates to try and get those partnerships, but also the massive infrastructure that's needed for the energy transition requires, and having just come back from Deep Tech Week in Australia, where they have the example of, albeit not really a climate thing, but the $1 billion investment into quantum computing. They're really thinking about those long-term investments, and they've got those mechanisms in place to do those infrastructure investments. So we may have to just leverage what Australia's doing, but wouldn't it be cool if we were also on that journey?
Yeah.
I'd love to build on an earlier point that you made around, and it's interesting to hear how you said you're collaborating to change the way that healthcare is provided, or the system that can then adopt the technologies that we're investing in and that we're seeing, because we're also slowly seeing that in agriculture as well, that farmers currently, particularly soy and corn, they're getting paid on quantity of produce that they produce, but more we're seeing a demand from the farmers that they want to get paid on quality. And so in our system, our farming system isn't set up to be paid on that. So so it's interesting, that's something that's happening in the health sector.
Some really interesting examples of move with the tech, but actually the infrastructure needs to also be there and foundational to be able to actually truly realise those opportunities. That's great. Murray, I'm not leaving you out, I promise. I guess, we have heard a lot of things come forward from the other panellists at the moment, and I wonder if you could share your thoughts on, really how we stay ahead of the game. And, Nikki said before that educators need to be futurists. Actually, probably we all need to be futurists, in order to really stay with that rapid change and continue to prepare for a future that we can't even imagine yet. So what are your thoughts on how we really foster that culture of innovation, how we develop, grow, move with it?
Sure, I'll address that question in the context of how we think about these issues, which is often from a kind of a policy perspective. So I heard it put beautifully a few years ago, and I think it was in the context of nuclear weapons. This idea about one of the central problems that faces humanity is that we have Paleolithic emotions, medieval institutions, and godlike tech.
Nice.
And I think AI is a great example of the last one, where we've got this tech which is enormously powerful, enormously disruptive, and it's far from clear that our institutions are capable at this point of putting in place the kind of regulatory frameworks and assurances that our society needs and would expect. So that's probably how we'd think about it. New Zealand, our economy has some strengths, but it's typically been, compared to our comparator countries, relatively low productivity. We have to be open to adapting AI tools, a whole range of technologies into our industries and allowing for higher rates of growth than we've seen in the past. And that growth is going to have to come from value add rather than from the more extractive parts of our economy. We've probably pushed the extractive parts about as far as we can. If AI can be a catalyst to develop more value from those economies, that's what's going to get New Zealand through the 21st century in really good shape. As those industries will generate tax revenues. That means we can afford excellent educational institutes like this one. The healthcare that our citizens expect of us. So we have to be open to it, but we also have to make sure that we can provide the right frameworks around it. And that's probably where we need to think about working with other countries. New Zealand can't solve the governance problems associated with AI by itself. There are a whole lot of other small democracies that are facing very similar challenges. So making sure we are engaging with and forming alliances with countries that think like us, and perhaps some that are a bit different, and learning from them and applying those lessons here. Hearing a fascinating and very well-informed discussion about healthcare, just reflect very briefly on that. New Zealand has a primary healthcare sector at the moment that's really under pressure, and one of the problems with when your primary healthcare sector gets put under pressure is that it displaces demand into the hospital system, which is of course a much more expensive place to treat healthcare that could be treated at the primary level. And what happens in the meantime, of course, is that patients get sicker. So it's bad for health outcomes, and it's bad for the overall cost efficiency and affordability of our health system. So if to hear some great examples of even using AI at the relatively less complex end of the spectrum to get more efficiency at the primary healthcare, the GP level, is a great example of how we can kind of take some pressure off from further down the system. So.
Yeah, great. In a moment I'm going to give the audience a chance to ask some questions, but actually maybe just building off part of what you said and talking about some of the shared characteristics with some other democracies. I guess thinking about our place in the world in the Pacific, how do we leverage or build on some of the connections with our Pacific neighbours as well? I wonder if you could talk to that as well, Murray.
Like you said, yeah. It's a great question. So I think, first of all, New Zealand, needs, sometimes I think we need to remind ourselves that we are a Pacific country. Our future is tied to the Pacific, and we have a shared future with our Pacific Island nation friends. I think we should always kind of think of it in those terms. One of the central challenges of the 21st century is climate change. Our Pacific Island neighbours are at the very front line of that. So working with those countries, particularly on adaptation in the years ahead is just, I think we have a moral obligation to do that, but I think it's also just a practical obligation. This is our region, and we're all facing these challenges together. So I would start there. I think there's also a lot of shared opportunities, and some of these are happening to some extent. I heard fisheries raised before. That's the mainstay of a whole lot of Pacific economies. There's probably more to be done there in terms of meaningful collaboration, shared opportunities, joint ventures with Pacific fisheries, from a commercial perspective, from a science perspective, and from a monitoring and enforcement perspective. So yeah, I'll pause there. There's some starters for 10.
Cool. And Kathryn, you said before about being over in Australia, and we could leverage what's happening in Australia, or we could also be taking some leadership in this space. When you think about the unique and particular characteristics of New Zealand, or the strengths and opportunities we maybe have in industry in New Zealand, what can we be contributing to some of these global challenges?
Yeah, absolutely. It is quite a concern when you're this little island, and we do have I thought it was the largest, but perhaps one of the largest, as Nikki was saying, economic exclusion zone, so the big moat of water around us that we have to look after. So certainly it's great that we're doubling down on the blue economy and what we can do to leverage the ocean, not only for decarbonisation but for our food sources, as we've got this 10 billion mouths to feed. But as those sea levels rise as well, and forgive my military background, and I hope I don't come across as doomsday, but as we see these sea level rises and this mass migration that's coming in, the war of 2100, what are we going to have in terms of sovereignty for our ability to continue to operate. And I think the COVID pandemic really opened our eyes to our pharmaceutical supply chains. And Australia are really aware of that. New Zealand is, but we sort of half-heartedly have gone into the biotech. We need to, I guess, leverage more partnerships to sort of to bolster our capabilities and be part of that centre of excellence. But it has a more near-term advantage of being a more of a knowledge economy. So, and that's, you know, rather than the tourism and export economy that we're reliant on. I mean, obviously, we're starting to see centres of excellence like, we haven't yet mentioned space, which obviously is becoming quite a forte here. And one of our challenges, we had many challenges in our Defence Force, but one of our challenges was the supply chain of parts as well, and right down to the fact that when I needed a specific nut and bolt machined, we had a shortage of machinists, but the space industry has bolstered this startup, was larger than that now, down in Dunedin, which is being machinist. So that's suddenly alleviating a supply chain and giving us that sovereignty to be able to then maintain our own assets. And so I'm really excited by that opportunity and what these big unicorns that are creating. There's so much virtuous, recycled, and a kind of off to the side opportunity. So I'd really love to see every part of our economy focusing in on becoming those experts and bringing those. Yeah.
Cool, great. Nikki, I wonder if you want to add to that as well, and particularly in terms of our place in the world, what opportunities we have to leverage that as well.
Yeah, sure. And this probably comes from some experience of being a cabinet minister that's gone around the world and listened to people as to their view of New Zealand, and then being in country, and then now being a consultant that then talks to different people at different levels of government and business. I think the world needs independent voices. That's something that we should be very, very proud of, and I think that is, we probably as a population don't realise how valuable that is at this point of history. I think obviously in the Blue Nature context, I think we have this sort of, we actually have a hell of a lot of space in terms of water and land. And obviously we've had a traditional focus from an agricultural perspective, but there's huge value in these emerging regeneration industries. And I don't think we've quite realised that. I think we have, as I said before, some of the best public servants in the world, and we do not realise both what I'd call unbroken democracy, but the intellectual property that is tied up over health, education, all of these different decades, and the capacity, classic example, I was in San Francisco, they were talking to me about homelessness, and where they were at, where we're at, if you talk to Helen from City Mission, just completely, decades apart. And so the ability to take some of those solutions to the world, I think is important. Some of the challenges that I think about, so those are sort of the opportunities, but that we're in this accelerated technological change. And, we've heard from different panellists about the opportunities within that, but I'll just be slightly delicate in terms of the way that I think a couple of things we need to think about that might hold us back. One is, I think all over the world, the politicians are realising the institutions are not changing with the rapid technological change. So we're still dealing with an industrial era. But there's lots of different reasons, some positive about the intellectual property and jobs and a whole lot of things, but we haven't very few countries, in my view, have cracked what citizen-centric services look like in the future of the role of government in this age. And certainly I worry a bit for New Zealand, like that we need to crack on and really reform our institutions and make sure they're at pace. The other thing that I would talk about, again, it's a little bit controversial, but is risk. So sometimes we've undercooked risk in New Zealand or overcooked risk. And whether I'm in AUT Ventures, Blue Nature, education technology consultant, you cannot have innovation without failure. You absolutely cannot. So we have to, if we want to be leading the world and supporting our researchers, supporting our technology leads, our public servants, we have to have a culture where we accept to crack some things. There's going to be a few things that fail along the way, and that is a cultural. It's a cultural thing, and this is not. I don't like to talk generalisation. We've got amazing pockets of people who are doing this, but I think just collectively, and then I guess the final thing I'd say on that, which is a lead on a good note, is still being small. Our ability, if you look at the sort of pace of kind of technological change, I still think the humans need to stand back and go, okay, planet's under pressure, humans are under pressure, not just kind of beavering along like this, right? Because you've got the institutions right across the world having the same problem, but New Zealand can move quickly. We have demonstrated in the past because we can get on the phone to the private sector, public sector, researchers, and so where we see, I think, the best of New Zealand is where culturally everyone around the table is open and has strong partnerships which require trust and require what frustrates me, I'm going to finish, but what sometimes frustrates me is ideology, because I can see you can have someone at the table who is absolutely focused on saving the planet, and you can have someone at the table who's focused on making money, right? If you agree on the problem that you're trying to solve and what the outcomes are, but sometimes they never get to the table due to the fact that they may think they're superior than the other person.
Yeah, please do.
Sorry. Yeah.
Around, or I suppose to the panel, is that often I've been to talks like this before, and people say that New Zealanders are risk adverse, but like, how do we not be risk adverse?
Yeah.
And even for an example, and I think you were dancing around maybe an example as being genetic technologies in the recent review of the regulation, that for that example within agriculture, that we're seeing innovators, universities, CRIs wanting this change. They want to be able to use genetic tools, and we're seeing that in policy that there's this interest, but ultimately, or from what I've seen, that farmers within New Zealand are like, oh, I don't know, this is how I make my money. Do I want to adopt these kind of tools? But I suppose my question is,
cultural change.
how do we create change?
I think it requires people from all different walks of life, political, private sector, public sector, to reframe innovation as a place where you literally can't have it unless you're able to experiment. But that it's, again, I don't think New Zealand is a risk. I shouldn't say I don't think New Zealand is a risk averse. I think it's very mixed. I think just sometimes the dialogue that occurs when something fails is not helpful. Particularly when people have put up their life savings and their whole body of research, and actually they're not going to succeed this time, but they will next time, right? So I think it's just a reframing by leaders about the components of innovation, and also, but it is also being responsible, in that, and comes back to the risk question. There's certain risks that actually ethically you won't take, right? In the GE area, you might argue, yep, okay, medicines, maybe not food, but, but it's being able to have intelligent dialogues rather than you did this.
Yeah.
It comes back to that leadership across different aspects of society and that reframing, but then also, and I think we can tell more stories. Like if you look at a lot of our successful entrepreneurs, like it's third or fourth time.
Yeah, yeah.
Can I ask a slightly controversial question for
Go for
Murray
it.
and for Nikki? Probably both of you. We're all familiar with the Gluckman review. What structural changes do you think need to happen
Oh,
in
nice question.
research?
Bring it on.
What would you like to see happen?
Well, again, and I need to be slightly careful because we had a discussion at the AUT Ventures board meeting the other day. I think you're not going to like my answer. Government, when, in a difficult fiscal time, as we've heard from the panel, it is an intelligent thing to do to ask where you know, if you have got duplication, where are you spending your money and how you want to maybe change things to do that. But what you've got to be careful is that you're not creating just another structure that's not really going to change anything. And so I'm more interested in what are the mechanisms for partnership, what are the incentives for partnership, what are the common priorities in terms of problem solving when you don't have large amounts of cash. And so I know that's not the answer that you want, but the detail matters, and I think getting under the hood of the institutional change, whether it's focusing on those things, like is it actually going to see more partnerships? Is it actually going to see greater crystallisation of our priorities? Because we can't compete, and we can still have, and again, it's not one or the other. You might, I give you this analogy of the Blue Nature students that have come in. We've had a couple of students, this is a classic example in terms of innovation. They walk through the door, Osea's creating autonomous machines and biosensors in water. He's now partnering with NIWA. He's a secondary student. He knew this machine is what he wanted to develop for his life. He talks about version 7. He'll be a great inventor for New Zealand. He knew, right? Maria is creating a plastic converter. Never imagined she'd be, I would convince her to put it on the back of a boat and save plastic from the ocean, but again, she knew. A group of the other students didn't know, but they are interested in the area of blue carbon and innovation. And so this capacity to be able to let or enable, whether it's our research funding, to sort of still be able to go off and have those extraordinary areas, but then with small amounts of cash also get capability and capacity to
make change.
And so the detail matters and the culture matters, and those drivers of incentives, partnerships and scale.
Did you want to respond to Murray?
Yeah, sure. I'll give I'll reflect briefly on this. I'm not an expert in educational structures, so I guess I'd take it back to what I think one is the central focus of our think tank, which is long-term thinking. So whatever review is happening now, really needs to establish structures that will be with us in 20 or 30 years, at least, in their essentials. The development of an innovative, dynamic, innovation system, ecosystem, and the cultures that surround that takes decades. The countries that have done it really successfully, they've had consistency, across changes of government over decades that has allowed them to develop these things over time. It encourages the investments and the risk taking in the private sector to happen over many years and to build upon itself. If we keep changing our approach to our tertiary education sector every, I don't know how often it happens in this country, perhaps every 10 years or something, where you see a big review, that's not enough time for us to really establish a dynamic, effective innovation ecosystem in this country. I wanted to touch briefly on some of Nikki's points from earlier, which I found myself nodding along vigorously to. I totally agree that we have a very good public sector in this country. It's not, I don't say that just as an ex-bureaucrat, and it's not always, I don't think that's necessarily always recognised in the public discourse. We're actually very well served in general by a public sector, but it can be very risk averse. That's perhaps not unusual around the world. We've got some excellent IP in the state sector, but getting it out and packaging it, turning it into some kind of a product. There have been a couple of really interesting experiments on that. Our quota management system, which was hugely innovative when it first came out. You could point to a few examples of where New Zealand has world-leading kind of public policy. Whether we can productize that and essentially sell it in other markets. Some success so far, but that could certainly be pushed a lot harder. And I'd be fascinated to hear Nikki's reflections as an ex-cabinet minister on that. The balance between wanting a more innovative and dynamic public sector and what is a reasonably risk-averse culture of bureaucracies, not just in New Zealand but all around the world. So how do you think we would balance that? And I'm not taking over your moderator position.
No, that's all good.
But it's something I've thought a lot about, and I'm very interested to.
And I would love you to respond to that, and then I just want to give the audience a chance to throw in some questions as well. So maybe Nikki.
Because I've been not quick. Just I would raise one thing: cross-pollination. So I remember when I was a minister, I visited Singapore, and I was talking to them at length about the capacity for public servants to move in and out of different fields. And I think they sort of had secondments in private sector. I think we're a very small country, and there's just still these walls that exist. And so there are many other countries we can learn from there, but the capacity to have much more what I'd call cross-pollination opportunities would strengthen relationships, would build a greater diverse skill set, would also help private sector and other people understand what is going on in the public sector, and would change culture.
Yeah.
Can I just build on that a little bit? Thank you. That was really, really, really quite provocative, and literally talking with MB at the moment about this issue around partnerships, right? Because we have really, the previous systems that we've had, both the way health research is funded, but also the government rules of procurement and things like that, have actually really hindered us from partnering with small New Zealand companies and startups and new ideas. It's really just not been practical at all. And so, that is something that I think we're really trying to change now, and that we do have a bit more ability to do so. And just wanted to do a real plug, if I'm allowed, for MedTech Innovation Quarter for Aotearoa, and the Teiti Toki Mata Ora program deliberately does this, right? And AUT is a part of this. It's a collaboration between the Consortium of Medical Devices and Technologies, about 6 universities around New Zealand and Callaghan, and us at Te Whatu Ora. and we've deliberately, there's a research acceleration program that's got 3 stages of funding for new ideas, and we deliberately try and put together the academics and the students and the researchers with the health service. So we will find them clinicians and parts of the health service to work with, so that we make sure that what they're working on is something that we see as a problem and we want some help with, plus Māori, plus a commercial partner or a pathway to market in some way. And if people don't have those relationships, then we try and help them to form those relationships as part of this acceleration pathway, so that we can work on these things together from the start. And we're trying to set our priorities as a health system into that system, so that the things that are being worked on are things that we think we could implement at the end of that pathway.
Cool. So I'm just going to pause for a moment with my questions. I have still lots more things I want to ask, to give people in the audience an opportunity to ask our panellists some questions on some of the topics that they've raised so far. Richard.
Thank you, all of you. Really interesting sort of thing, and the health thing has come up a lot.
Just pause for 1 second. He's just running with the microphone. Thank you so very much. I forgot about the microphone.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, go.
There we go. Firstly, Richard Wright, I'm a colleague of Nick's in the Faculty for Health and Environmental Science. I'm also the co-director for the Centre for Active Ageing. So Murray was the one who mentioned the ageing population, and Nick, you mentioned a lot about educating the young, educating the youth, educating the future. And, I'm also a numbers person as well. So we took the numbers of, in 2050, the 10 billion population. A quarter of that population is going to be over the age of 60. And that's double what is currently over the age of 60 on the planet. So I've just come back from a month in Japan. A third of their population is over 65. Half of their workforce is now relying on over 70 workers over the age of 70, and 1 in 10 are over 80. And so the future of what we see in New Zealand, we're going to hit those numbers in about 2050. We're going to have those numbers in New Zealand, those statistics, if we believe World Health Forum and UN. So how can we involve older adults, which in 4 years' time, 1 in 5 over in New Zealand is going to be over the age of 65. How can we get this population into tech, into innovation? How can we be educating these people who are traditionally more resistant to change? And I was interested to see the entrepreneurs coming into your tech. What is the average age? Are you seeing entrepreneurs, older entrepreneurs coming to you guys?
Of our 14 ventures, our average age is 42.
Really?
Interesting. Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, and also of the 14, it's 8 were born outside of New Zealand, which I find another interesting observation. And we're certainly seeing a lull post-COVID, because a lot of the PhDs were foreign students, and they're the ones also who spin out for the ventures that we invest into. So we're just not seeing the numbers. It will come back, but yeah.
Yeah, I would say as well, we've at Sprout, we've got big effort at the moment into engaging with universities and CRIs, and the kind of deep tech that we like to invest in does take 10, 15, and you would know this, 20 years before it even comes to potentially being investable. So we are seeing entrepreneurs that have that 20 years experience in this gene in plants or etc. But it's interesting your question around how do we help people in that age bracket adopt technology, where I suppose what we've been focusing on within the Agritech sectors, how can we support food producers to resolve the challenge of labour shortages, because people are getting older, and don't know the number, but there is a number around the age of farmers is around 50, I don't know what the number is, it's high. So yeah, I suppose to the other panel members, any answers?
I'm actually just thinking that it converges with health as well. When you think about the age of our GPs and this mass exodus from our general practices coming, and what that means for labour shortages within our health workforce, I guess the same kind of challenges.
You can't assume that the willingness to take up tech has got anything to do with age. Really, we see a lot of assumptions made around what older people will and won't do around tech, and it's really not true. And you must, you have to design your technology-based interventions for the audience that you want to use it, right? Like it's got to fit into their lifestyle, their context, the way that they are happy to use technology, and often we don't do that.
So in Japan, they've been doing the hospital-to-home program now they've invested about 7 billion into that, and they are finding that it's not necessarily the patients, obviously they'll be treated any way they can, it's the health practitioners that don't understand this technology they're being asked to use. And again, that comes down to education and training, that it's been put on them to do, and it's not what they were trained to use.
If you're designing something that fits intuitively into their workflow, then they will take it up, right? Like often we're getting things that are not really designed from the perspective of the people who are actually going to use it, and that's where they fall down. So we brought in one of our allied health colleagues, brought in the use of iPads, this is a long time ago, now for our community allied health therapists. So these are people who are driving around the whole of the greater Auckland region to go and see people in their own homes. And loads of people had tried to get them to use technology before. They'd given them laptops and various other things, and they all failed dismally. And then they gave them an iPad, which was so intuitively easy to use that they could just do exactly what they were doing on an iPad. And they actually found that the older therapists took it up way easier and loved it immediately because they were fully confident in what they were doing in their job. They knew exactly what they had to do in their job, and this was for them, a minor change. For the younger therapists who were still trying to work out what their job was and how to do it properly, it took them a lot longer to take up that technology. But it was designed and it was intuitive and it fitted into their existing way of working. So for the older people, it was no issue at all. So
we're certainly seeing a shift now from where, for a while, it was the technologist trying to solve problems for the practitioner. Whereas now we'll only invest in a practitioner who's gone out and found a technologist who can help them solve a problem that they know. And as an example, in the Defence Force, we had so many people pitching, like, here's a ruggedized laptop, and we're going to make it augmented reality so you know how to fix a plane, but they've never been on a plane and smashed their head because they lost a bit of sight of the thing on the little nooks and crannies that you have to climb into. And then suddenly, actually, the big solution that changed our world was being able to search the documents, for one, so you could quickly find your reference, know what hydraulic fluid that you needed, and also be able to attach documents within the asset management. So there was really, really small wins that changed our world, and the ones where they came in thinking they'd know how to solve our problems were just not it.
Nikki wants to add something.
A couple of ways to answer that question. The first is in the concept of kind of innovation in companies, and one of my friends who's like an expert on innovation and consults across the world, I'd still argue the basics of what's the problem and then the team that you're trying to build. And my view is often the best teams have intergenerational capability because they understand the problem. They might have some tech, etc., but they've got some life experience and a whole lot of other contacts that often come with age, to be frank. So there's sort of I think this sort of recognition of the importance of intergenerational people within innovation. The second way that I would answer that is sort of the ageing population. Obviously, I've talked about working with young people, but there's a huge amount in the edtech sector of micro-learning. And I think we are in an age now for which, even if I go back 10 years being a Minister of Education and bringing in ultra-fast broadband into schools, the kind of cultural things that I came up against in terms of parents and a whole lot of other stuff, I think that the nature of the tech and information is it's so accessible. So the old kind of worldview that there will be a whole lot of people that will push up against that. The grandchildren have taught them. I don't think that world exists. But the final big barrier that I think does exist is ageism. And I think in societies right across the world, there's got to be a pretty big shift against that because, again, I'm biased. I think some of the most superior societies recognise that the 70 and 80 and actually 90-year-olds that have a huge amount to contribute, and it's just working out what are those. Are there some institutional changes in terms of the future of work? Is it cultural? And yeah, I think countries that will win will be very progressive as to how people have entry points to contribute.
Cool.
Very quickly, jumping on. I mean, my fellow panelists have answered this question masterfully, but I just want to a shout out for an excellent question. We talk about what New Zealand's going to need to do to provide for its ageing population. You can flip that around and say, what does New Zealand need to do to ensure that our ageing population can continue to contribute to our economy, which we'll need them to, given as they represent a larger and larger proportion of the workforce and the population, to our societies, and hopefully to our politics as well, right? Ensuring that they're represented and engaged and influential across all the key axes of our society. So, yeah, fantastic question.
Cool. Any other questions from the audience before I dive in?
One policy thing on that just actually comes to mind is, and again, it's in the context of this Blue Nature ecosystem that we've developed. One big part of our ecosystem is partners and mentors. And I still believe there are a huge amount of people that would love to mentor, but we have still these sort of old mechanisms, old scale. And so that can be dialed up quite significantly, I think.
Question for you. Sorry for not knowing your name. Oh, sorry, yes. I have a question for you. If by 2050 we'll have like 10 billion people, it means that we'll need more land for housing and agriculture, no matter what type you use. Do you have any feasible development in your field to tackle that problem?
In terms of producing the 50% of food required, yeah. There are, to your question, that we don't have more land, so we can't just make more land to produce more food, but one of the big trends we have seen for a while is, like I mentioned, controlled environmental agriculture, so vertical farms. So about 2021, there's a big boom in startups who are within that space, and more recently, though, we have seen a few of them fail. But the ones that have been successful, and the challenge that they overcome was how do they financially make them viable. And so an example, I had the opportunity to go visit was Plenty, which is a vertical farm. Now they've got partnerships in the Middle East and potentially coming to the Pacific as well. So that's being able to produce more food on limited land. Additionally, I am a big, to be, is the word provocative, I am a big supporter for gene technologies, and I do believe that is a way that we can provide the food that we need for 2050. And another example is Zcal, which is a startup based in America who's producing or increasing the quality of soy, corn, looking at other crop types as well, so getting more from what we have currently.
Nice. Cool. I'm going to go back to this question of how we can really foster this culture of innovation. And I think we are in this world of misinformation, lack of trust in institutions and academic institutions, and in research. I think we've even heard on the panel today, I guess, some different ideas put forward that have risk of sitting in competition with each other. You used a great example before of, some of the medical technologies, but actually that requires transformative change in how we think about the delivery of healthcare to truly realise those opportunities. But we also then talked about, the need for some stability, I guess, in infrastructure to foster that ecosystem for innovation. So, we need to be on one hand agile, responsive, able to respond to change, but on the other hand we need some stability and infrastructure that can be foundational to that. So all that in mind, I guess how do we build and foster innovation? How do we address some of these challenges? Maybe if I can start with you.
Yeah, and to an earlier point made, I think it is the leadership and that feeling compelled to solve the problem. So really love what AUT and are doing here even and Auckland University with growing the entrepreneurs, and I would love to see lighting more fires in terms of people's spirit to want to drive that change and feel empowered to do that across the country. And I know from my 10-year-old and 8-year-old that the teachers are, I'm maybe lucky to have teachers that are telling the children this, and they're learning about climate and they're learning about that change, but we need a little bit sooner. And I know I was a little bit of a latecomer to the whole entrepreneurial thing, and I think just having that mindset for the university students coming through, so that they're sort of seeing, oh, actually, I learnt this and I could apply that there, and then just those incentives to encourage them, like cultural change. Yeah.
Cool, Mary. I'm going to roll down the panel on this one.
I think we should be able to, as a country, live in a country where innovation and entrepreneurship aren't partisan issues, where we can have an agreed framework by which we are going to build up New Zealand's innovativeness, its dynamism, its entrepreneurial systems and culture over a long period of time, and build that into the political fabric and the social fabric of this country in a way that we don't kind of swing back and forwards, either in terms of the rhetoric, in terms of the structures that support those things. Figuring out and there's plenty of peer countries to look at who have sorted this out. Singapore's come up a lot today, enormously impressive on this front. What does New Zealand need to develop a innovative system, and how are we going to move towards that? And not just the next election cycle, but for the next 5 or 10 election cycles, and get on with it.
Cool. Robyn?
That's very meta. I'll go do something really small and specific.
Yeah, do. Well, also you have a foot in both worlds, right? You're both within academia and without. So yeah, and I do think it is about bringing all of that together, right? So I do think that this kind of really multidisciplinarity, bringing all these different perspectives, different critical review and thought to our issues in the health system is really useful, right? So I think that it's a lot more about bringing all of your students from across all of your different disciplines into the realities of the health system and getting their help with that. Programs like studentships and internships and fellows programs that we've been trying to foster over the last few years, it's really great to get all the really diversity of thinking to some really big, gnarly problems that we have in the health system. And sometimes we just solve little things here and there, but sometimes, it becomes part of a bigger whole around our culture of being able to do things a little bit differently within our system. Cool.
I think what everybody else has said as well, there are many solutions or many ideas of how to foster a culture of innovation. I think from my personal experience, I feel very fortunate and lucky to have found this entrepreneurial world that I work in quite early on in my career, but it was by chance. Actually just met a friend who worked in the sector at the supermarket, and we talked about it, and I did my postgraduate studies in the space and continued on. So from my perspective, I think that one key way that we can induce more innovation or culture of innovation is more targeted support to young people, both all the way back to primary age to secondary school to at our university. That there are some great programs, but we need more. We need more people to think firstly about the problem and customer, and then choose the sector that they want to from there.
Yeah.
I'm repeating myself a little bit, but just probably summarising a couple of things. One is changing our approach to risk, so that we accept as a country, in order to have innovation, there's going to be a whole amount of things that don't work. And I think that has massive flow-on effect in terms of funding and the way that we treat people when things don't go well. Secondly, I think the opportunity for democratisation of innovation and the way that we might upskill. And I just take your point in terms of, as the former Minister of Education, upskill the nation to be understanding emerging technologies, not for the sake of that, but if New Zealand is an ideas factory and people can come from anywhere and put up a good idea, then I think that is kind of a game changer. The other thing that I mentioned is institutional changes. We're still dealing, I think, with a pretty industrial era in terms of the rate of technological advancement. And so how do we, take your point, have some institutions that are enduring over a long period of time, because New Zealand maybe sometimes doesn't take a long-term view, but then also be able to be nimble enough to, whether it's unlocking public sector IP or, in my case, another case, we've had student projects that haven't occurred because the timelines for environmental approval or permits mean that we're not moving on what is one of the most pressing problems that we need to move on. So I think that issue of smart institutional change, and then the final thing that I just keep thinking about, from whether it's AUT Ventures, whether it's the work that I'm doing as consultant or BNA, we do, it might sound slightly contrary to the risk point, but the areas where I see success, the founders and the entrepreneurs have very much focused on a problem that needs solving, not their pet idea.
Yeah.
And so what's the problem? And I think the National Science Challenges are actually quite amazing for New Zealand in that sense. So I think we can do quite a lot more around having that discussion about what are the pressing problems we want to be solving.
Yeah. And I'm going to start with you with this question, Nikki, as well, if that's all right. Because I'm thinking about, we are somewhat institutionalised in academia. We've got a room, I think, probably pretty full of researchers and academics. And you have some insider views on that, being on the board of AUT Ventures. What does academia need to do? How do we need to change and evolve to stay on this train, be on the train, get on the train?
Be careful in terms of my answer, in the sense of I have enormous respect for academics who give their life to a body of work, and I think that we shouldn't generalise in terms of different people want to operate in different ways. But the one thing that I would say in AUT Ventures, we've talked about this as a board, and our history has not been perfect, but is being open to building relationships of trust and open dialogue. You might have a conversation that says, no, I'm not interested in going down that road, but being able to trust other partners to have conversations that might lead to, as I said before, either a commercial venture or it could be a social enterprise. And so I think being really open. We talk a lot at the board level about disclosures and how do we build trust. And it can be, I think we've had some good wins recently, but we don't want to take 100 years to have those wins, so that then more academics trust us. And yeah, I think it's not just about academics, it's also what the leadership of AUT can do, what AUT Ventures can do to build that trust, I think, the partnerships.
Cool. Throwing the same question out to other panel members.
I'm probably getting a little bit down in the weeds, but I have spent 8 years at universities here in Australia and the UK, and I honestly think most of what I learnt was not very usable. And I wish that, in hindsight, that there had been a course that was just my final year of my 4-year engineering degree and my master's year where it was all applied, and we could leave those who really want to do the 400 level math and the 400 level pure science to those, but we're all forced through it because of this kind of almost academic snobbery that actually doesn't unleash how I could create change, which would have been, and because you learn so much when you're doing those applied projects. I just wish that we could be, and it's just a bit of a scary thing because there's so much inertia around this is, you had to have gone and done this engineering degree, you had to gone and, so what about if there was like this, the Masters of Bioscience Enterprise that Erena has done, and is the only place that I employ people from now because the quality, I mean, they self-select to get on that course, but then the quality of human that comes out of that course, because it's so applied, is so relevant. And they're just thinking big, and they know how to do market analytics, and so I would love to see more, and we're back to those micro-credential kind of conversations, but I'd love to see more timely, more applied, more engaging education systems for my children when they get to that age.
Yeah. Erena, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, or I don't know if I should promo my master's degree since it was at
or
Auckland
maybe,
Uni.
you know, what the foundational, I think it's about, you know, what are the principles behind it that make it what it is that we can learn from.
And so the degree is around, you have to have a STEM background but focused on research commercialisation, so the fundamentals of market validation, financials, law and etc. And we are seeing more degrees like that popping up, but maybe slightly different. I know Whittaker Uni have a entrepreneurship, industry-focused degree as well. But I think the main thing that I took away when I was finishing my undergrad was I love science, but I didn't want to work in a lab, and I did some lab time, and it wasn't for me. And so what is next? Where do you go when you're passionate about science, but you want to also create impact? And so to your original question around how can AUT or how can institutions, I suppose, create innovation or around that, but I would actually focus on the individual, is that there are different types of scientists, and if you want to create impact and you want to create, and there's many scientists who do, is that you do need to engage, and so looking for degrees like I did, or if you want to engage with Sprout, we're openly looking for researchers and scientists who want to create impact and have that technical background. But,
nice.
Absolutely. We also want to create career pathways for academics. That's how we see ourselves.
Nice. Did you want to add anything, Robyn?
Yeah, I would just agree with the panellists. I think it is about, you know, giving our real world problems to the universities, to the students to be working on, right? And we need to do a lot more engaging around what are the real problems that we would actually like help on across disciplines, right? So it doesn't have to be health students, you know, engineers in particular, but loads of others, computer science, data scientists. You know, we don't have enough data analysts who actually understand the complexities of health. And so they graduate, they come out, they're really good at the data science, but they've got no idea about how bad health data is and what they need to do in order to get good outputs from it. So, you know, really exposing all our faculty and undergrad students to what are our real issues that we'd really like help with. We could do more on it on both sides to help with that.
Add to that, one thing that we see at Sprout being within agriculture is that, and even when I've engaged with AUT, it's like, oh, we don't work in agriculture, we don't work in the food sector, but actually, like you said, and same with the health sector, is that if you have the technical expertise, if you AI, engineering, or biology or chemistry, that those are all applied to the sector that we work in. And so again, just a conversation or engaging is the first step.
But and also just give one practical example. Never underestimate yourself as an academic. When someone's coming through the door with a product, how they might be able to adapt it. Because, like, I give the example, I'm involved in a very small renewable energy company, young Māori founder Tamatoki, in the area of batteries and smart trading. And there's a person that's been involved in the company who I'd call more of an academic, and his impact has been phenomenal, where we were thinking previously. So it's sort of again, that openness, which is actually you might look at it and go, oh, it's not really where my research is, but actually when you get deeper into a conversation, you might suddenly change the trajectory of a company quite quickly, or a enterprise to make social impact.
Yeah. I think, and I'll start with Murray, soon as Murray hasn't had a chance to contribute to that question yet. You know, the conversation that each of you have just contributed, many of the challenges that we are talking about or have talked about today are things that really are cross-disciplinary endeavours. They require cross-sector solutions. It requires a range of disciplines and people and skills and expertise and experience to come together to address them. So how do we work across sectors better? How do we bring people together, to open up these opportunities? I guess starting with you, Murray.
Great question. I mean, all the challenges of the 21st century, I think, what is the term of art at the moment is polycrisis, I think. So many of these challenges, are economy-wide, society-wide. They inherently, per force, require collaboration, not just between different, say, academic sectors or different sectors of the economy, but across the economy, across academia, across politics, and then across nation states as well. And so it's just entirely essential. Again, I found myself in total agreement with the panelists as they were answering the previous question. I guess one thing I've learned over the course of my career that's very important for collaboration, and something that academics and experts don't always get right, as they look to collaborate with people from outside their world, is the fundamental importance of clear communication. When your ability to communicate your expertise in a way that resonates with your potential partner or your audience, to the extent possible. And I'm dealing, on this panel, I've got some incredible experts who have very deep subject matter knowledge, but to the extent that you can not use jargon and not lose potential partners, potential audience or customers even, as you're kind of talking about what you can bring to the table and how that might integrate with as part of a wider collaboration, part of a wider solution to a project. So.
Great. Anyone else want to add their 2 pence worth to that question?
I could add, I suppose something that I'd like to see more of cross-sector would actually be tourism within the sectors that we play in. I'm not sure what they would look like in the health sector, but within agriculture, that is we're well known globally in New Zealand for our agricultural sector, and there are a few examples in New Zealand of people bringing, international people to their farms and etc. But how could we see that within Agritech and technology? An example I have is a company in Spain called Agritech, and they are they use AI models to help create formulations for specific targeted pesticides and probiotics for soil. But also they have this whole big tourism part where you can go and visit. They actually have a slide that you go down to get into the lab. I presume the scientists don't use that when they're trying to do things, but it's the whole package of tourism and digital tech and agri-tech. It was really interesting.
Very cool.
Final thing, and I'm just looking at Michael right now just to make sure I don't say anything from the body, but as I understand it, AUT are going through a process as well. I mean, it sounds like a small thing, but about physical space, and it's a difficult thing for the university, but all over the world, how do you create smart spaces that encourage daily conversations between academics and private sector and a range of other people. So I kind of so don't want to get ahead of the Vice Chancellor, but I think that again, we're such a small country, and actually that could be significant.
Yeah, I'm a firm believer in porous boundaries between our institution and our academic silos and community industry. Yeah, so all four porous boundaries. Maybe if I can just invite one or two questions from the audience before I give our panel members the chance to say a final word to close.
Now it looks on. Yeah, great. Koto, thanks for the patience, and thank you to the great speaker panel that's up here. I have a question for actually everyone, including Nicola up there. I'm a postgraduate student about to complete my PhD. Happened over the pandemic, so the comment about space is particularly relevant because many of us in postgrad are occupying digital spaces. And we have 4 different campuses. I'm technically located on the North Shore, all the way up in Millennium, but I live in South Auckland. And so the element of how to be able to connect up-and-coming students and researchers and emerging researchers and asking what is industry doing to encourage us to engage across both our faculties and within our schools. So Richard and I work within the same school, but we don't ever have occasion to meet. And so what opportunities are there for from industry and from the university to encourage postgrads as well as emerging researchers and academics to collaborate in the sense of a national science award, but maybe with lower risk, lower overhead investment, and perhaps opportunities for us to start engaging some of these challenges preemptively, maybe in undergrad, maybe it's postgrad, maybe it's a, lottery fund. But I know when I worked down at WinTech, they had a mechanism through their design lab to bring in counsel to ask questions of students, and then they had a curriculum and a course that students could then address wicked problems. So there was a direct mechanism of connection. So I'm wondering, what's coming from whether it's local government or the institution to encourage those types of collaborative applied work for us to think of more cross-disciplinary within the institution before we graduate?
I'm going to invite our panel members first. I guess you gave one example before in the medtech Q space as well, but invite panel members first to add some thoughts to that.
Brilliant question. And something I wish there was more of all the time, but that is why I love for example, the Master of Bioscience Enterprise, because it is so engaged. When I did my Masters in the UK, it was in aerospace vehicle design, and we had all of the industry coming in with their problems, so it was really integrated, and that's why I loved it so much. And as a consequence, everyone was employed by the end of it. So it's a sort of a win-win, appreciating that it's not getting to the pure science because you're very much applied research, but it's just, it does make for a more engaging and
I don't necessarily have an answer to a question, but I think it's a great question that I suppose we've been talking a lot about and pointing fingers at researchers, and they need to engage with industry, but what is industry doing to engage? And what we see as well is that a lot of the corporates within agriculture, they don't necessarily want to actually engage directly, and so they use intermediate organisations like Sprout or Food HQ, or the list kind of goes on to then, that type of organisation then fosters those interactions. But I don't see why can't it be from the industry themselves engaging. So interesting question.
Two parts to answer that question. One, I want to throw to Michael, because I think it might be useful for Michael to just give a little bit of an update around the innovation sort of strategy in terms of AUT, in terms of what, I don't want to say something that's not public, but then secondly, I think what was really powerful of what you articulated was separate to physical space and safe spaces where people can come in a more informal way and share, the whole concept of virtual connectivity and again, I'm sort of wearing my EdTech hat. I think in my mind's now whirring away about the power of immersive technologies, and I think one of the problems that we still have is going to be trust from different parties. So we've certainly seen this at the AUT Ventures when you engage a corporate and then something happens. But I think this power to have very virtual experiences where you might say, right, we're going to have someone from industry at the table, someone from academia, someone from the venture world, and we're just going to have a discussion about this, and it can be quite real, particularly when you're dealing with, as you say, multiple locations. People might not even have the funds to get across town. So, yeah, that's a really interesting concept in terms of immersive. Did you want to comment a little?
Yeah, I could add a few things to that. It's a really interesting question. I love this description as well of inhabiting a digital space. I think that's how a digital environment. And being a postgrad student is sometimes a pretty lonely experience because you are very focused on your one particular topic. And it was, I was counting back 22 years ago when I finished my own PhD, and I think it was a different experience. I think that has changed over those few decades, not necessarily for the better. I remember it as a time where I felt free to do a lot of things. I had a lot of hobbies, more hobbies than I've ever had in my life since, probably. And so the experience now is different. And I think there is an opportunity as we want to flesh out Tekete, AUT's new strategy, which is about being transdisciplinary and about being impactful, to actually increase, as you pointed out, the opportunity to collaborate across disciplines, particularly in for our researchers. We have 1,000 doctoral students, I understand, at any one point in time. So there's a lot of opportunity for them to meet. But they tend to, at the moment, become very focused on one particular topic. I think that part of this is that over the past 5 years or 6 years that I've been at AUT, the institution became very attracted to the idea that we were climbing up the research rankings, and we just need to get more publications out and do more. And I think that Tekete signals quite a shift in strategy, just shifting more towards what is the impact, what is the change that we're going to see in the world, and hence thinking about what impact we will have and what problems we should be focused on. So I think that will change over time. One concrete action that I would suggest is that AUT is going through what's called the long-term academic and capital plan. I think that's the correct term, which is looking at questions of what spaces, facilities, infrastructure do we need over the long term, and we should be starting to consider building out now. That may only be a process that's only open to staff. I don't know if you do some teaching on the side and may be able to access it. If not, then do get in touch, because I think it's a really interesting question to share that experience and where there might be an opportunity that we could build this into the long-term vision.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I'm mindful that it's time for us to draw things to a close. So what I'd just like to do to round us off for this session is to invite each of our panel members to maybe just share one final thought that they want to leave us with today. Maybe if we start with you, Nikki, starting at the other end of the panel, not giving you time to think.
Brilliant. I guess there's a lot of challenges in the world, and I think I started with the comment around people being under pressure and the planet being under pressure. And I think, in part because I've had some significant health challenges, I think a lot about how we can be positive. How much, if you're under stress and how much time you sort of maybe waste fighting and in conflict. And I know this sounds like a bit of an airy-fairy thing, but I think New Zealand we have a lot going for ourselves. We've got really smart people. We've got an unbroken democracy. We've got rule of law. We've got natural resources, no better articulated when I met with the Foreign Minister of Singapore, and he said, we're a rock. We have to invest in our people. You guys have everything. And so I think when we think about partnerships, that means being open, trust, and being positive. And when we think about coming together on a group of problems as well, there's a level of confidence that we need to have in terms of backing ourselves. So I sort of leave you with, don't leave here with all the 50 problems in your head. Leave here with, cheesy, but the only barrier is ourselves. I think we live in an age where we have the technology to probably save the planet. We're just not organised. And so get organised in your field and get open and be proud of where you're from, because we have more opportunities than anybody else to make impact.
Cool. Not bad when you didn't have time to think of the final thought.
Yeah, so that's a very good summary. I'll keep my summary or final thoughts very punchy and brief. That I think the severest problem that we're facing today is food security, and many of the comments or sectors we've talked about feed into that. And so if I was to urge you, that opportunity lies, one, in technologies, AI, gene technologies, engineering, list goes on, lies in management practices, farming practices, and policies that all focus on making sure everybody has a meal in front of them the next day.
Nice.
I guess, I started with, we've got difficult times at the moment in the health sector, but difficult times is always an opportunity to do things differently and to do things well, and we are really open to any of those opportunities that help us deal with the really tricky, wicked problems that we have right now.
Cool. Larry?
I think I'd just make the point that everyone in this room has made an excellent choice about which country that you've decided to live in. We are not a perfect country. We've got some challenges that we haven't been able to wrap our arms around so far, but we're extremely well governed when you look out and compare us to most of the rest of the world. Joe Biden's got a nice statement about don't compare me to the almighty, compare me to the alternative. And there aren't many countries in the world better placed to thrive in the uncertain conditions of the 21st century. So.
Great.
Cool, and maybe I'll finish with a call to action. I'm from Bridgewest Ventures, as mentioned before. Love to talk about solving global problems, decarbonisation, helping the human condition, anything in between. And we create ventures, so we're just looking for science to translate.
Awesome, cool. Ngā mihi nui kia koutou. Thank you all very much for your wisdom, your experience, your provocations, ideas, challenges, opportunities. If everyone could just join me in thanking our panel members. Do you want to add a final word, or?
Not really. I need to say that we're welcome to stay and have a chat if people have got time, and thank you very much also to the inimitable Professor Nikki. Thank you.
Oh, there we go. Gifts.
Give the gifts out to the panel after.
All good. Yep. Awesome. Thanks, everyone.